Thanks, Chris. That was a great way to kick off the conference, I thought. So I'm Paddy Power. I'm on the Govis committee. I'm Senior Manager at Stats NZ in my day job. And I'll be your chair for this morning's session in here. And I'm here to introduce our first speaker, who is Michael Jagusch. Yeah, I knew I was going to stumble over that. Okay, so Mike is the Manager Mission Enablement at the National Cybersecurity Centre. I read that, I thought, wow, this sounds like this guy works for NASA. So he has several roles within the National Cybersecurity Centre and a broad experience within cybersecurity. He's worked in customer engagement, providing organisations with security advice and guidance, both at a practitioner and a governance level. Previously, he's been involved in the more hands-on aspects of cybersecurity in his role managing the systems engineering team who design, build, maintain and evolve NCSC's cybersecurity capabilities. In his current role, he's focused on delivering strategic outcomes by leveraging the expertise of the entire NCSC. Mike's teams provide communications, policy, stakeholder engagement, and business support. And Mike is going to be talking about building cyber resilience, 5 things you can do today. Welcome to the stage, Mike.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, ko kakipuka tu manga, ko waipa te awa, ko tainui te waka, ko Ngāti Mani a Poto te iwi, ko Ngāti Uikahe te hapu, ko toki kapu te marae, ko Michael Jagusch toku ingoa. Good morning and thanks for the opportunity to talk here today. I must admit, I'm sitting there listening to the introductions. This has really intrigued me up on screen. I assume, is that an AI picking up? No, it's someone typing. Oh, wow, okay. Good. It's good that humans are still more efficient than an AI. I very much liked how when there was an applause, the applause came up, and I thought if it was an AI that if you tell a joke, your goal must really get to have the AI pick up laughter, and if you didn't, it would be a bit unfortunate. So as per the introduction, in my 10 or so years at the NCSC, I've had a lot of exposure to a lot of different people tackling, I guess, what I would call different parts of a complex cybersecurity challenge, from boards all the way down to hands-on IT security people. And what I've found that a lot of people almost get a little bit overwhelmed by what they perceive to be quite a complex area, and they maybe don't know where to start. And the people that I see do really well are people who are able to just break down what is quite a complex topic. They're able to break it down, tackle it bit by bit, and they're able to communicate well about what they're doing. So today I want to focus in on giving you all 5 things that I think that you could focus on and give you some tips around how we at the NCSC talk about and think about cybersecurity, and maybe these are some helpful things that you can take back to your organisations. Before we get there though, I'll talk a little bit about the role of the National Cybersecurity Centre and a little bit of the overview of the threatscape in New Zealand, and then I'll get into those 5 things that you can focus on. So first of all, I'll start with who we are. So we are the National Cybersecurity Centre, and we are part of the Government Communication Security Bureau, and we take advantage of our unique position as an intelligence agency to fuel our cybersecurity mission. We're focused primarily on the cyber resilience of nationally significant organisations, and those are organisations in the public and private sector on whose continued operation New Zealand's security, wellbeing and economy depends. We're also focused on what we call national level harms, and often this involves focusing in on a state-sponsored actor, so that is a malicious cyber actor who is being resourced or sponsored by a foreign government. But over time, this is changing and evolving to encompass threats or vulnerabilities that could present major challenges to New Zealand's economic and social wellbeing that often aren't coming from a state actor anymore. Now, cybersecurity is a really broad topic with multiple dimensions and is important to all New Zealanders. When I talk about cybersecurity, I'm primarily talking about security at the organisational level as opposed to keeping your own Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter secure. So with all of that in mind, we have our 3 overarching strategic objectives: defend national security, raise cyber resilience, and facilitate digital transformation. Now, we work towards these objectives through providing a range of cybersecurity functions. These include services focused on the protection of classified information. We have a regulatory role over a range of sectors, and then we provide preventative advice, threat detection, and disruption services to our customers. When all else fails, we also have an incident response capability where we help victims respond to severe incidents. We group our services under these 4 areas that you can see on screen: detect, disrupt, advise, and deter. Firstly, we detect indications of malicious activity, vulnerabilities, or weaknesses across New Zealand. We do this through some technical capabilities that we have, but we also do this through extensive customer relationships, just getting out and about and hearing about where organisations are struggling. We then disrupt these threats from harming our customers' environments. Now, this can range from deploying staff to work alongside a victim of an incident, or it could be about releasing an advisory on our website about a particular threat. We also have a technological disruption capability called malware-free networks. Through all of this detection and disruption activity, we develop a broad understanding of the New Zealand landscape, including the threatscape and where organisations are struggling. And we use this to create advice that helps our customers to focus their security efforts. Now, as a result of all of our efforts, our goal is that we are deterring our adversaries because we are raising the cost of conducting malicious cyber activity in New Zealand. We're making it harder for adversaries. We're taking away sort of the easy wins that they may have. Now, we represent this as a circle because we're very conscious that as we work with others to raise cyber resilience throughout the country, our adversaries, or the bad guys, are also constantly evolving the techniques that they're using and using new tools. And so we then need to detect these, disrupt these, create advice, and the cycle goes on. Also, the technologies or the IT environments that our customers are using are constantly changing. We've talked a bit about ChatGPT already today. And so we need to make sure that our service offering keeps pace with the technologies that people are actually using in their organisations. So our service offering here represents a multi-layered approach as required to tackle cybersecurity challenges, and we really encourage organisations to do the same, and that's something that I'll talk about later on. Now, we don't do all of this work just for fun. We do this work because there are threats or incidents that occur in New Zealand. So we deal with about an incident a day, ends up being about 350 a year. It goes up and down around there, but it's relatively consistent over time around that 1 incident a day. And now it's important here to remember, because we have this focus on nationally significant organisations or national level harm, this is likely a very small proportion of the amount of incidents that happen in New Zealand. I know when you start to talk about incidents affecting individuals, for example, you get up easily into the 60, 50,000 per year, I believe, are the numbers that Cert New Zealand report. So I think one of the most interesting things in terms of these incidents is that around a third of the incidents we deal with, they are linked to state-sponsored activity. And the scale of state-sponsored activity against Aotearoa makes it challenging to identify, track, and record because these actors are constantly evolving their techniques and tactics to escape detection for as long as possible. These actors are also less likely to cause immediate disruption to a network or cause something that's obvious or public. They are more likely to conduct activity to support espionage or their economic development. And this can involve the theft of information and intellectual property. Now, organisations who report incidents to us do so in confidence, so I can't share all the details of these incidents, but there are a couple of key themes that I want to pull out. So first of all, we see that vulnerability scanning and gaining access to an internet-facing device remain the most commonly seen cause of incidents, and this continues a trend where sophisticated actors look to take advantage of known vulnerabilities. So we continue to see an increase in the scale, in the speed and scale of mass exploitation of known vulnerabilities. So what this means is when a hardware or a software provider goes public that there's a security flaw within their products, we see malicious actors effectively scan the internet to find those devices. They take advantage of these flaws, they establish footholds, and then they selectively return to certain targets to conduct further activity. Now, a key point that I want to make here is that all of the incidents that we deal with are preventable, and there's normally information available for people about how to prevent them. Adversaries are also taking advantage of weaknesses within supply chains or trust relationships. The two most severe incidents out of those 350 that we dealt with were actually connected. Analysis revealed that after the malicious cyber actor compromised the first organisation, they used its access to target the second organisation by exploiting a trusted relationship that the organisations had between each other. So Aotearoa's security interests are being challenged by the international rise of strategic competition. States are more readily pursuing their strategic objectives in ways that undermine the rules-based order that we have relied on. And these geostrategic shifts have presented opportunities for state and non-state actors to use malicious cyber activity to seek persistent strategic access to networks. And it's really clear that even in New Zealand, our domestic threatscape evolves alongside geopolitical trends. The primary example we have of this most recently is that this year we actually had a slightly reduced amount of incidents, around 50 less than we normally would in a year. And our assessment is that that was actually because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So even though that is very far away from us, we know that Russian and other Eastern European actors feature significantly in the global cyber threat landscape. And so our assessment is that with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, these actors from that region have been more focused elsewhere rather than conducting activity that would have previously had an impact on New Zealand. So these heightened geostrategic tensions have impacted the institutions, rules and norms that we have relied on, and it's likely that as geopolitical competition continues to rise, there will be ongoing implications for our networks in New Zealand should malicious actors attempt to leverage these capabilities for strategic advantage. Now, to give you some quick insight into what these state-sponsored actors look like and the type of activity they do, I'll talk about two advisories that we recently released. So the first one, we joined our partners in releasing an advisory with activity associated with the People's Republic of China, and this activity had been observed affecting critical infrastructure throughout the globe. These actors use tactics, techniques and procedures that we call living off the land. So that is about using built-in systems within IT systems, built-in functionality within IT systems. And they do this to avoid detection because it looks like normal activity. Then earlier in May, along with our international partners again, we released an advisory about malware used by Russia's Federal Security Service that they use for long-term intelligence collection. The most interesting takeaway for me out of both of these reports, as though in both the activity is described as highly complex, technically sophisticated, and extremely significant resourcing behind it, the mitigations are incredibly basic. So in terms of the sophistication, I quote from the advisory around the snake malware. We consider Snake to be the most sophisticated cyber espionage tool in the FSB's arsenal. The sophistication of Snake stems from three principal areas. First, Snake employs means to achieve a rare level of stealth. Second, Snake's internal technical architecture allows for easy incorporation of new or replacement components. And lastly, Snake demonstrates careful software engineering, design and implementation, with the implant containing surprisingly few bugs given its complexity. So quite a stark picture that paragraph paints. But then if you get to the mitigations to how to prevent the snake malware from having an impact on your network, the top four mitigations are change default passwords, require minimum password strength, require unique credentials, and separate user and privileged access accounts. These are mitigations that have been well known and around for a long time and are relatively simple. And these are the mitigations that would prevent a state-sponsored activity from having an impact on your network. So to me, this is just a really clear example reinforcing that even the most sophisticated actors primarily look to take advantage of well-known flaws. Now, another key trend that we observe year on year is the blurring of lines between state and non-state actors, or criminally or financially motivated actors. We're increasingly observing these financially motivated or criminal groups using capabilities that until recently were only within the domain of state-sponsored actors. Now, this growth in sophistication is particularly concerning because these actors are more likely to cause disruption to a network and care less about, I guess, the international politics associated with conducting this type of activity. And the increasing availability of cyber capabilities reduces technical barriers to entry, enabling any group with purchasing power to conduct these types of operations. Now, one of the most commonly used techniques by these criminal actors is ransomware. Ransomware activity targeting New Zealand is increasing over time, and some of the most common ransomware variants we see are highly likely marketed by groups that operate ransomware as a service. This is a business model that involves selling or renting ransomware to actors who independently compromise networks and deploy the ransomware. These groups can be sophisticated and well practiced, and similarly, they can adapt their techniques over time based on what makes the most money for them. In recent years, ransomware operators have taken to finding and destroying or encrypting data and backups, and then copying large amounts of data so that they can conduct a double extortion where they ask you first of all to pay to have your data or your systems unencrypted, and then they ask you again to pay so that they won't publish that information online. We've also seen ransomware actors actively monitor the media to understand the level of impact that they're having on your network and using this as leverage to increase their ransomware demands. Our analysis shows that one of the top two sectors impacted by ransomware in New Zealand are healthcare and the manufacturing sector. So it's a realistic possibility that these cyber criminals target these sectors, particularly the health sector, because they recognise that health organisations are more likely to pay a ransom or extortion fee because downtime to IT will become a threat to life. Now, earlier this year, Cabinet confirmed that government agencies should not pay cyber ransom. There's a lot of legal reasons for that. But from a security perspective, it's also important to remember that paying a ransom doesn't actually guarantee that you'll get your systems or data back. It equally might put a target on your back because someone knows that you paid last time, you may pay again. Instead, like other types of malicious activity, ransomware activity is preventable. Now, on screen is a great visual from our colleagues at CERT New Zealand, which demonstrates that there are multiple opportunities where an effective control could stop a ransomware event. Each octagon up there is one of CERT's top 10 critical controls, and they have lots of information available online on implementing this control. I guess what the image shows is that a lot needs to happen before the impact can be felt on your organisation. So if the mitigations are well known and somewhat obvious, why are these attacks successful? Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people may not know where to start or where to focus their efforts. So to help with this, we've recently released the New Zealand Cybersecurity Framework, and we've had some really good input from people across New Zealand to develop this framework. And we've released what we call a beta version, so still open for some feedback. So our goal here is really to demonstrate what good cybersecurity looks like for other organisations, and we're making this framework publicly available. It's on our website if it suits your organisation. Now, the framework sets out how we think, talk about, and organise cybersecurity efforts, and its 5 functions on screen represent the breadth of work needed to secure an organisation. People familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework may see some similarities, and that we've based it heavily on NIST, but we've adapted it for our context here in New Zealand. The main point of difference here is that we've chosen to place greater emphasis on security governance and culture by separating it out as its own function. Now, as I said earlier, we encourage organisations to make sure they have a well-rounded approach to cybersecurity, and we view this framework as a really helpful way for organisations to assess their current cybersecurity priorities and see if they are focusing on these different functions. So the framework is composed of two parts, the interrelated concurrent cybersecurity functions you see on screen, and then for each of those functions, we have 5 security objectives. This is probably the other biggest change we've made to NIST. While NIST has over 22 categories and 100 subcategories, we have 25 things for people to think about to make it a little bit easier, and also recognising that a lot of organisations are already using existing frameworks. We feel that this will make it a little bit more approachable for them. So we're really hoping that this framework helps senior leaders and executives understand cybersecurity and what their organisations are doing. We don't expect decision makers to understand all of the technical detail of your cybersecurity roadmap, but they should be making sure that their organisations are taking a well-rounded approach to cybersecurity and investing appropriately across the different functions and not over-investing in certain areas. I guess the key thing we see is that often organisations focus a lot in on the technology solutions or the detection, and what we're really encouraging people to think about is more broadly, think about cybersecurity more broadly. So I'll use this framework to give you the 5 things to focus on today, one for each of the functions. So firstly, guide and govern. So this is about cybersecurity being promoted through governance efforts and by providing guidance to your people. The objectives here are to embed security principles and practices across your organisation so that cybersecurity supports the organisation's outcomes. The second objective is to make sure that people don't have to be security experts to use your systems. The third, we encourage you to prioritise your security investments to focus on real threats to your organisation, and make sure that an investment is continuously focusing on improving your security posture. You should also make sure that you receive assurance internally and externally that your security efforts are effective, robust, and adaptable. Now, the key thing I'm encouraging you to focus on here is security awareness training. Cyber attackers often rely on human behaviour, such as clicking links or downloading and opening files, to give them valid credentials or access to a network or a system. Our partners at Cert New Zealand find that over 82% of the incidents that they deal with have a human element. Now, the first thing that I would check if I was you is to make sure that for your security awareness training, you're doing more than just a one-off video or module as part of an induction program. Security awareness should be continual, and cybersecurity messages should form part of your regular corporate communications. Not every week, maybe once a quarter is a good target. Another key thing to keep in mind is establishing a culture where you don't blame victims. You want people to report incidents to you. You want people to report near mistakes because it gives you a sense of what's actually happening. Then the second area, identify and understand. So this is about knowing which cybersecurity activities you are responsible for and where across your IT environment you are applying them. Your objectives here are that you should understand your organisation's appetite for balancing risks against opportunities. You should make sure you have an understanding of your key information assets. You should understand how your organisation and assets could be targeted. What's your threat environment that you're working with? You should understand any Māori data you hold and ensure you are clear about treaty partners' security expectations. And you should make sure that you understand how your supply chain or your IT providers and relationships affect your security posture. So the one thing I'm encouraging you to do today is to make sure that you're using the same tools, techniques, and languages to manage cybersecurity risk as you are other risks in your organisation. In most organisations, risk management frameworks are well used and understood, and you probably have them existing for things like health and safety, for example. Now, cybersecurity risk should align to these frameworks, because it gives consistency in risk management, and it also frames cybersecurity in a way that is familiar for the organisation and the decision makers. This can be as simple as making sure your IT security teams are using the same Excel spreadsheet. This approach here, using your existing risk management frameworks, can also help you make a well-informed and nuanced decision about the use of something like ChatGPT, which we've already spoken about. Third, prevent and protect. Now, this is about focusing on reducing actual risk and focusing on incremental improvement rather than thinking that you will achieve perfect security tomorrow. So your objectives here are building security and privacy into systems by default, making sure you separate systems so you can choose who is given access to what based on their role within the organisation. You need to keep your systems up to date, applying the latest patches and addressing new vulnerabilities as they are disclosed. You need to think about using modern security tools like multi-factor authentication and detection tools. And you need to identify and protect any Māori data in line with treaty partners' expectations. Now, the one thing I'm encouraging you to think about today is the use of multi-factor authentication, with a particular focus on systems that hold sensitive data, are used by administrator-level users, or are accessible over the internet. These should be prioritised for multi-factor authentication. Now, there are various methods for implementing multi-factor authentication, and I encourage you to find one that works well with your business model. And unfortunately, some multi-factor authentications methods are also vulnerable to attacks, so I'd stay away from something like text verification and move towards something more like a physical token. You could also consider implementing multi-factor authentication for a critical business process, for example, paying a large amount of money to an external request. You could have a process where these staff need to follow, all requests need to be given in a separate communication channel before they are made. Detect and contain. And this is about being realistic that threats or incidents may occur in your organisation and you need to be able to contain them. So security monitoring is a necessary component of knowing when abnormal activity is occurring. You need to make sure that you are monitoring what is actually happening on your systems and can tell when things are not operating normally. You need to continuously review and check that your security controls are effective. You need to minimize and monitor the interaction between your different IT systems. And you need to make sure that you control the ways in which your information moves between systems. You should also make sure that you have a way to isolate systems when needed. Now, the one thing I'm encouraging you to do here, and yes, this is 100% a shameless plug for a service that we offer, I'm asking you to check whether or not you receive the National Cybersecurity Centre's malware-free network service, and if not, talk to your IT provider about whether or not you could access it. Now, Malware-Free Networks is a cyber threat disruption service which we deliver in partnership with private sector in New Zealand. Based on our visibility of threats, we generate indicators of compromise based on what we know of indicators of compromise that give you a clue if bad things are happening. And we disseminate this to our partner organisations. And then our partner organisations then use this threat intelligence to detect and disrupt cyber threats to their customers. We've disrupted hundreds of thousands of malicious events this year alone. And one of the really interesting findings through operating this capability is that although we use international sources to help develop our threat intelligence, the vast majority of events that we disrupt come from domestically sourced indicators. Now, this suggests that there is a unique New Zealand threat landscape. And finally, respond and recover. So this is about prioritising your security incident response to get critical services back to normal operation as fast as possible. The objectives here are to develop response plans that focus on likely events, not doomsday scenarios. Make sure that those plans are flexible and can adapt as you gather more information. You should understand where you can get help from and the level of service that you can expect from your providers before an incident happens. You need to know your critical systems and how they contribute to business objectives so that you can prioritise what you need to restore first in an incident. And you should also make sure that you're practicing your response plans to improve them and have confidence they will work. So the one thing I'm encouraging you today is to check whether or not you have an incident response plan. And secondly, check that it is up to date. And the reason for this is cyber incidents are really stressful situations, and often for you and your teams, if you're involved, it may be the first time you're ever involved in a cybersecurity incident, hopefully the last as well. And you'll need to make quite difficult decisions without perfect information. And while that happens in a lot of other sort of incident response activities, natural disasters and others, the thing to remember is there will be a bad person who's actively trying to make this harder for you as well. So there'll be some really complex decisions to make where you balance up security versus getting services back up and running. How do we know that we are restoring to a known good state and things like that? So without being too cliche, a lot of this uncertainty and stress can be managed with a plan that is regularly tested. It really helps to reduce some of this complexity and stressful situation. And if anything, although you wouldn't have exercised the exact scenario you're in, I think as humans, we really enjoy the fact that we have a piece of paper to fall back to that has clearly articulated the steps that we're going to take. And a plan is also really useful for communications because you can really clearly communicate where you are in an incident response process. And when you're at an early stage, for example, people may be expecting you to have a lot more information that you do. And when you have a plan, you can refer them back to that you're earlier on in your plan. So a plan should describe who is responsible for making these types of decisions, and I really recommend you sort that out before an incident. If you're clear on who has responsibility for decisions, it makes that actual decision a lot easier rather than also trying to figure that part out during an incident. So check your plan is up to date since your last organisational restructure or realignment. Often just the role titles will have changed. People may have been mentioned and moved on. So that's a really good first step, just making sure that the roles and responsibilities are still relevant for how your organisation is structured. Now, 3 things that I've seen organisations do well during incident response. Firstly, and we've already talked about this a little bit, people who are able to describe choices in terms of the risk choices in a way that aligns with your organisational risk management processes. Once again, it just brings that familiarity to the decisions. People who are able to use scenario generations, they're able to tell a good story about how things could play out, and they're probably moving beyond just the technical or the IT aspects. They're starting to talk about impact on your business, impact on your customers, and where this incident could be heading. And thirdly, people who know who their trusted advisors are internally, but also externally. If you're relying on vendors and you're paying vendors for incident response services, know what you're paying for ahead of time rather than trying to litigate that during an incident. So as I said at the start, cybersecurity is an important topic for all of New Zealanders. And I think one of the most interesting things about cybersecurity and the thing that keeps me working in this area is it's probably the only area of national security where literally everyone matters, especially if you're working in the public sector. We all have a role to play in protecting the security of our information and therefore potentially the security of our country. Now, we recognise at NCSC that we can't do this all on our own, so we continue to find ways to scale our efforts through collaboration and partnerships, and talking at conferences like this is a really good way for us to share our perspective and also hear a little bit more about what other people are struggling with so that we can make sure that our advice and guidance is keeping pace with what people are actually dealing with in their organisation. Now, I really hope that my talk has highlighted that although this topic can be complex, we are operating in a constantly evolving threatscape, and the technology we're using is constantly changing as well. The reality is that taking small steps can make a huge difference to your organisation and therefore the country's overall cyber resilience. Now, almost everything I've talked about today is available on our website, and I'll have my contact details coming up shortly if people are interested in more. So go away, think about these 5 things. if you've already done these 5 things, find another 5 things to figure out and keep going like that. And that's really how I would approach it. You won't become cyber secure overnight. And in fact, we don't often use the term cyber secure anymore. That's why we move towards more things like cyber resilience, because the reality is there's probably not an end state here. It's about consistently moving and becoming more and more resilient. So I look forward to answering some questions, and we'll be around for the morning tea break to continue conversations. And as I said, interesting area of national security, because we truly all are in this together. He waka, e he noa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Cool. All right, we've got the... Thanks, Mike. I thought that was great. Really practical advice there. So we've got some questions on Slido. If you're not on Slido, have a look. You can vote questions up, or I don't think you can vote them down. But you might be more interested in other people's questions, or you might want to put in some of your own. The first one we've got here is: do you think cybersecurity is getting enough attention from government organisations, especially executive leadership teams? What do you wish that they knew?
Yeah. So I think for me, my frame of reference when I get this similar questions to this is when I started doing this around 10 years ago, and we'd go and speak to a board, we would be very much starting in what I would call cybersecurity 101. Cybersecurity, it's a thing you need to think about. Threat. Some scary stories about some things, and then we'd leave, and I'd say we were definitely realising that we were giving this information to people for the first time. Now, if I think about when we go to a board and talk, they are asking us specific questions around, my teams tell me we should do either this or this, which one is better? And so I guess my assumption from learning that is that people have moved a long way. People know the basics, and then now they have a plan in place, and they're really trying to get some detailed information about what to do next. So I think it is definitely getting better. I think the thing I wish that all executives knew is probably a little bit about what I've talked about today. I think probably one area where cybersecurity professionals struggle is almost the storytelling or the narrative around cybersecurity. And so I do worry that some boards get presented a risk register with heaps of red dots that says everything's impossible and all our systems are old and we don't have enough people. And I do worry that there's a little bit of, on cybersecurity professionals, for us to improve our ability to tell a story around, yes, there are some challenges out there for us, but we've chosen these things to focus on because that will make the most improvement for us. So I'd encourage the executives, if they're not getting the right information that they need, we have a lot of information available for our guidance around the top sort of questions that we would encourage executives to ask their IT security teams so that they get the information they need.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I might put these two together.
Sure, yeah.
If that's all right. Yeah. I'm not sure how much Mike is actually going to be able to say about these questions, but are we living in an era of digital Cold War? And foreign state actors test our national and institutional systems for vulnerabilities. Presumably we do the same of other sovereign nations. I think I can probably, if we do, you're not going to tell us.
No, that's all right. So I'd say on the second one, it's probably important to remember that cybersecurity or malicious cyber activity would be part of an organisation's overall foreign policy approach. So when we talk about actors who conduct these types of malicious activity, that probably aligns better with how they view the world. So if you think about, I've talked about advisories about Russia and PRC. We also saw Russia invade a country recently. So I think it's important to remember that cyber or malicious cyber activity is part of how an organisation promotes itself internationally. So you'd really need to think about whether New Zealand's place in the world and how that sort of activity would line up with how New Zealand plays as a international player and how that lines up with our overall approach to foreign policy. are we living in an era of digital Cold War? Interesting question. There is quite a lot happening in the moment around the setting of international standards. So the internet effectively is governed, the protocols that guide the internet are governed by international bodies. And I think a really interesting thing for us to see play out over the next year, the coming years, is whether those the kind of existing standards that we have for the internet remain, or whether certain states look to promote their own interests in how the internet is governed. So I think it's an interesting space to watch, and probably would line up with that statement around how we know that New Zealand and our role in the international rules-based order is potentially being challenged currently. Will we see more of that play out in the way the internet is governed? Don't know.
Cool. So we've probably only got room for maybe 3 or 4 more questions. There's lots of questions here. Obviously, lots of interest in what you've been saying, Mike. Security and privacy are often seen as the big black hands that stymie transformation in an organisation. I've definitely heard those kinds of conversations going on. How do you avoid that?
So that's about, the way to avoid that is, once again, I think it's to put security, I'll talk about security more than privacy, to put it alongside how your organisation makes decisions on other things. So to use an example, I'll use social media as an example. So people will be aware lots of media interest around TikTok, and hey, we should ban TikTok. But actually what we encourage organisations to do is to run that through a pretty standard risk management process, of which the first step should be, what is the business need for this? So if you think about a social media application like TikTok, there is likely some business needs to use TikTok, especially for government agencies, to reach audiences that they might not otherwise be able to reach. So once you've established a business need, then you can work through the security or privacy implications, and the security implications shouldn't trump the objective. So if I think about social media, for example, if there's a business need to use social media, but your organisation to use TikTok, but you're concerned about some of the threats or risks associated with that, that doesn't mean no. It means you should look at some compensating controls around it. So for example, you could only have TikTok allowed on certain devices. You could provide extra training for the staff who need to use that. You could make sure that you monitor those devices for additional threats. So I think that's the way that you need to approach these things. First of all, does our business need it? And if yes, it's more about how do we make it secure, as opposed to the business need and the security being traded off against one or another, because security should help our organisation. Security shouldn't stop our organisation. So once again, I'd think about how you make decisions on other risks. I mean, businesses make decisions on risks every day. How are you making those decisions? And then how can you apply that to security?
Cool. I think we'll take this question, which I think is a slightly different angle here. How do you maintain resilience at the National Cybersecurity Centre itself, given you're dealing with so many threats? I mean, you guys must be dealing with...
One a day?
Well, yeah, one a day,
Yeah.
several a day.
Yeah.
How do you keep your mojo with all that going on?
Okay. I think, to be honest, we're very lucky that people are quite interested in this space. Like our staff, I think, are really passionate about it. It's quite a fun place to work, I must admit. You might be out doing things like this today. We may have some other staff working alongside a victim in incident response. We may have staff on a conference call with the NSA about latest threats. So there's quite a lot of different elements that I think keep us all interested. And I think it's also becoming just more and more clear how intertwined cybersecurity is becoming with all of the other objectives that people have. So we're becoming cybersecurity is becoming a really important part of all businesses and all daily life. So I think that interest keeps us going. I think other than that, there's some more practical things about keeping our mojo. So we categorize incidents so that we make sure that we are providing a proportionate response to an incident based on the threat and impact. We look to establish good people rosters when an incident kicks off so that people aren't working 24/7. We make sure that we get some food delivered if we're working overnight and things like that. So I think it's relatively standard stuff that I'm sure most organisations are facing. And then I think there's a wider resilience thing around just making sure that we're able to recruit staff interested in this area and then retain them. And there is a pretty competitive private sector environment that we're competing for skills with. And so that's why we're lucky to have that national security focus, which can keep people motivated, even if they may be able to get more money elsewhere working for a private sector. But drawing them back to that overall mission and what we're here to achieve seems to help us out.
I think we'll have to wrap it up there because we're heading for morning tea. Thank you very much, Mike. As I said, I thought that was a really practical and engaging presentation. We've got a little gift here from Govis to thank you for that. And if we can all thank Mike in the usual way.
Thank you.